Good morning, good afternoon, good evening from whichever part of the world you are joining in. Thank you so much, everyone, for giving us your time and joining us for our session. Today's session is Peer Reviews Toolkit, Skills, Ethics, and Practice. And to begin, just a moment. I'll just start with a few instructions. You can change the audio option on your computer by clicking on phone or other settings. All of the attendees' microphones are muted. If you have any questions, we request you to please put them in the questions tab, and we are going to take them at the end of the session. This session is going to be recorded, and you will be receiving the certificate as well as the recording of the session 2 hours, 2 or maybe 4 hours before after the session is over. Thank you so much. And just the agenda. Right now, I'll just go ahead, introduce my teammates who's on call with us, introduce a speaker, and then our speaker, Kat, will talk about the session today. And in the end, we'll have 10 minutes for question and answer sessions, and then the closing. Now, before I begin, I just want to really thank my colleagues for being here. I am Disha Lakanpal. I am the Regional Marketing Manager for South Asia. On the call, I have Amy Zhang, who is the Regional Marketing Manager for Taiwan, Hong Kong, Macau, Vietnam, and Thailand. We've got Rosita G. Rosita is the Regional Marketing Manager for East Asia. You may not be able to see her on screen right now. She's just left for something, but she will be back. My team is in the background helping all of you have a very smooth experience so that we can conduct the session from starting to beginning and ending and smoothly. But if you have any questions, please to put them in the questions tab, and we'll try and sort them out in the end for when the time comes. Now, for our speaker, Kat, who is the peer review editor at Emerald Publishing. She joined Emerald in 2023. Having worked previously in production, copy editing, and editorial office, she currently works on the marketing and business and management journals and is also involved in getting some of Emerald's exciting new titles ready for launch. Kat, thank you so much for joining us today. Just a second. Oh, and I can also see I've got Sangeeta Menon. She is the Regional Publishing Manager for South Asia. She'll be joining Kat in the question and answer session. Sorry, Sangeeta, I didn't see you because I waited at 9. I hadn't seen you joined in, so I wasn't sure. So yes, we've got Sangeeta Menon as well, the Regional Publishing Manager. She'll join Kat at the end of the question and answer round, and she will also be in the background, all together. Thank you so much, Kat. I'll just share just make you the presenter so you can start. And once again, thank you so much for joining us and accepting to do this session for us. We can see your screen. Wonderful.
Thanks, Disha. That's great. Okay, thanks so much, Disha. And yeah, thanks everybody for joining the session today. This is a webinar on peer review, so we'll go through some aspects of peer review that will help to provide some context, give some guidance, and hopefully answer some questions that you might have, especially if you're new to the process. So if you are here, then you're probably likely to be interested in the process, and maybe you want some of it to be demystified a little bit. And obviously you're conscientious and ethical researchers, and so you'd like to know how to review well and what things to look out for when you are peer reviewing. So these are the key areas that we'll cover. So that's the role of the peer reviewer, how to give constructive feedback, why peer review matters, some ethical considerations you might want to think about, and how to get involved as a reviewer for Emerald, as that is obviously who I'm representing today, but different publishers will have different methods. The webinar is designed to answer some common questions that we hear from new reviewers. So if you have any questions, as Disha said, please let us know. So imagine that you are an author and you've worked for years on your research and producing a manuscript to submit to a journal. And obviously many of you will be authors already, so you can imagine this very easily. So the manuscript's published after a surprisingly short review process, but you're very excited to get your work out there, and besides, it's a really good paper. But a few months later, a reader of the journal contacts the publisher to highlight some critical flaws and accuse you of shabby work, and maybe even accuse you of copying someone else's work. And while that's not true, there's now a delay while the publisher has to investigate and discovers that the peer review process was compromised and not substantial enough, which means that you left a few important errors in the paper that you hadn't spotted when it was accepted. You may even fear that your paper will be retracted. These are some real-world consequences of poor or unethical peer review, and it's why peer review is a vital task that authors and editors rely on to make sure, to the best of their ability, that the content they accept for publication has been checked thoroughly. It's a role that gives back in that when you become an author, that you want and expect the same to be done for you. So what is peer review? So if you think of it as a quality check by people who really understand their subject. So when an author submits a manuscript, it's sent to experts who are their peers, who read it closely and give some honest, constructive feedback. And the job isn't to tear apart or criticize the authors or insult them, it's to help strengthen the work. So you're looking at, are the ideas clear? Are the methods sound? And does the argument hold up? Does it make sense? Is it ready to be disseminated to a wider audience who will then use it for research themselves? So editors use those expert insights to decide if a paper is ready or if it needs more work, or maybe it isn't quite the right fit for the journal, and they can make that decision as well. The whole process is there to make sure that by the time research is published, it's something that readers can genuinely trust. So in short, it's a collaborative effort that improves research, protects quality, and hopefully keeps the scholarly record strong, which is really important when you're relying on that to then further your own research. Although it's peer review as a service is usually unpaid, it is vital as it benefits everyone involved and makes sure that when we read and use research in the future, we can feel confident that it was assessed thoroughly and can be relied upon. So the example in the slide is a peer review process that we often see. It's quite a common one. The paper will come through to submission, and then it will end up being accepted, rejected, or revised. And this is all based on peer review comments. So types of peer review there's different types you might come across, and this is just to demonstrate the most common that you will find in academic journals. Other types can be used for different publication formats. You get books, you get preprints, but these are the ones that we tend to talk about, especially the first three in journals publishing. So single anonymous peer review is when the names of the reviewers are hidden from the author, but the name of the author is shared with the reviewers. And the fact that reviewers are anonymous means that they can speak honestly and hopefully impartially, but the knowledge of the author's identity can help the reviewers place that article in the context of author's earlier work, and it can give them that extra context that they need to make a good review. Double anonymous peer review, and this is what we use at Emerald for our journals, is when the reviewers aren't told the name of the author and the author never learns the name of the reviewers. So this is the surest way to make sure that the process is objective. The focus remains on the content of the article, and the possibility of reviewer bias is eliminated, or at least hopefully minimized as far as possible. Reviewer bias is a real thing, unfortunately, because we all have biases that we might be aware of or unaware of. It might be conscious or unconscious, favorable or unfavorable. So by using double anonymous peer review, the aim is to hopefully make sure that authors receive the fairest assessment possible. Occasionally, you might find triple anonymous peer review. So this is when the author, reviewers, and editors' identities remain hidden from each other. So the author is usually identified sometimes by a number.
Kat, so sorry to disturb you. Just a little bit of feedback. They want you to talk slowly.
Okay.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Thanks.
Okay. So triple anonymous peer review is when the identities of the author, reviewer, and editor remain hidden from each other. The author is usually identified only by a number, and communication takes place through a website or the submission system. And this eliminates potential bias as well. And open peer review is less common. It can vary in form. It can be as simple as the author and reviewers are known to one another, or the reviews and the reviewers' names may be published alongside the article. And it could take place pre or post publication, and sometimes the reviews get their own identifiers, which means they are more discoverable and citable themselves later. It offers complete transparency, and some people believe that this makes the reviewers more likely to produce higher quality reports. because their identities will be known. But obviously then there's also the possibility that authors will discover the identities of the reviewers, and if they've had an unfavourable response, then that could have consequences as well. So you might not see this one as often, but it is becoming more common in some journals to publish the reviewer names alongside the article. So when you do come to review a paper, part of your review will be giving an overall recommendation to the editor about how best to proceed. So there may be slight variations by publisher and journal, but for Emerald, these are the 4 options that you'll find across most of the journals. So accept tends to be reserved for revised papers. It's unlikely that a paper will be so good initially that it doesn't require any more work. So when you submit as an author, you should expect to receive a request for more revisions. And once that's been done, then that's when you are more likely to see an accept decision. Minor revisions varies from journal to journal, but they often require the author to make relatively small adjustments to the paper, adjustments that shouldn't take too much time, and there tends to be a shorter window for authors to do that. So the adjustments might be related to author guideline requirements. So you might want to reduce the word count, change the formatting with tables and figures. It might be making a few more citations in the article that are required to just improve that part of the article. Or maybe elaborate the findings a little more. So it's work that shouldn't require the authors to go away and do more extensive work, but it still needs to be done before the paper is ready for acceptance. Major revisions often do require the author to make more significant improvements. So this is a type that will take weeks or even months rather than days. So authors might be asked to address flaws in the methodology, collect more data, or conduct a more thorough analysis, or even maybe change the research question slightly to make sure the paper is really contributing something original to the body of work. Reject options should generally be reserved for some cases where the issues can't really reasonably be fixed. So it's a fundamentally weak research question, major methodological errors, missing data, or maybe the paper is too far outside the journal's scope to really end up being suitable as a publication. Even if you are recommending reject, your comments as a peer reviewer should guide the author to understand why the paper isn't suitable and help them improve it for future submissions, so that when they do come to resubmit their work, they have a better chance of being accepted, or at least taken further into the process. It's important to note that reviewers don't make the final decision, so you are providing expert advice that helps the editor to decide. So it isn't just on you if you're a peer reviewer. It's not something that anyone expects you to catch everything while you're doing. It's just to give the editor that guidance that they really need to make an informed decision when they have so many papers to handle themselves as well. It can be quite scary to recommend, for example, a major revision or even a reject when you are new to doing it, but a major revision especially does mean that the editor sees potential and the reviewers see potential. The paper isn't being rejected, it just needs to be strengthened, and that is to the benefit of everybody involved. Even if you do feel you need to recommend rejection, there should be some good reasons for doing so. So it's making sure that it's the weaknesses that would need too much work to fix in the allotted time, or it's just too far out of scope. Editors may send the paper back to the same reviewers after revisions, depending on the journal. So if you do recommend revisions, be aware that you may be asked to assess if your comments have been addressed. So what is peer review for? Why do we do it at all? So here are some examples of quotes from companies that explain why it's important that we have peer review. Peer reviewers play a role in making sure the scholarly record has integrity. It depends a lot on trust and expert evaluation and recommendation of experienced researchers to make sure that publications are suitable for further research. Peer review aims to achieve integrity, reliability, and trust in research by filtering out poorly conceived, conducted, or reported studies. And from Emerald's side, we really appreciate all of our reviewers. They're essential to the publishing process and make sure that articles that we publish are of the highest quality. And we know that reviewers are specialists in their area of research and are best placed to assess the soundness of an author's work and share their own knowledge. Journal editors are experts in their field, but they have so much to do and so many papers to handle. Peer reviewers don't replace the editor's expertise, they supplement it. So having peer reviewers means that specialist knowledge can be drawn upon. For example, a manuscript may cover marketing and economics, and different reviewers can be used to examine different areas and make sure that the paper as a whole adds up and makes sense. So without good peer review, there are serious consequences. So these are some examples from Retraction Watch in the last couple of years of the consequences of peer review that hasn't been done correctly or ethically. So you see a lot of retractions from different publishers and some people getting flagged for unethical behaviour involved with peer review. So sometimes you get authors reviewing their own papers, which obviously is not ethical because then they're obviously going to give themselves a good report. You get peer review rings, which is like a selection, a group of individuals or groups who review each other's papers and make sure that they get through to the next stage. In one instance, 130 fake email addresses were used in one instance at a different publisher, and that led to a mass retraction of 60 papers by the same author. The same author group, sorry. So that obviously affects the journal's reputation, but it can affect the reputation of other genuine authors who have published in that journal as well. And, sorry, I've gone too far. And it can lead to grievances as well. So grievance processes of any kind can take a long time to resolve. And if the author hasn't been involved in these unethical behaviours, that obviously has bad consequence for their work as well. It means there's a delay in getting it out, and also it can harm their reputation. And also the reputation of the researchers in general in the subject area, the editors, and of course the journal itself. So we all have an investment in making sure that peer review is done correctly and to the best of our ability with as little bias and concern as possible. So next we'll look at feedback, as that is the heart of reviewing, and looking at what makes it valuable and respectful. So the goal, obviously, with peer review and giving feedback is to help authors improve their work and not to overwhelm or discourage them. So I always think the best way is to think about how you would feel when you're receiving feedback. We've all had to receive that at one time or another, and it's always good to think how your comments may land when they arrive in someone's email inbox. You don't know what kind of situation they have going on at home or in their lives, and it might just be the thing that makes them feel even worse if they get some critical and rude comments. It's also not professional really to do that as well. You want to make sure that your feedback is as constructive as possible, so that you're elevating the discussion yourself. It's always good to be positive when you can. So you want to highlight the good parts of the manuscript. Even if you're going to recommend a rejection, there's bound to be one or two aspects of the paper that are actually worth commenting on and saying that you've done this well, even if you want to then go on to say how they can improve. It gives the authors a nice bit of feedback to go with as well. Also, being a kind reviewer is really important. So kind feedback is also more useful to people, like being kind and making sure that your comments land correctly. So if you think about a time you've seen a review online for a product, for example, even on any sort of website, and it hasn't helped you decide if you want to buy the product because it's too vague, or in some cases the person hasn't actually even used the product yet. So the person reviewing might think they're being helpful by posting some nice comments, but the review hasn't actually helped the company to sell the product, and it hasn't helped you to buy it. So it's the same with manuscripts. You want to be kind instead of nice, which is, there's a slight difference. You want to be giving the authors a chance to improve and sell their research so that readers in the wider community want to buy it. So it doesn't help if you're too nice, as in you just want to ignore problems or flaws, or just assume everything is great with the paper. You want to be able to point out what they need to improve, because it helps everybody. And also look out for some possible concerns. So common ones might be the use of artificial intelligence without declaration, copied or plagiarized text that you think you might spot, parts of the paper that don't make logical sense, and maybe because they've been copied and pasted, or they haven't been written by a genuine person, or tortured phrases that don't make sense, which can be an indication of a paper mill or a non-human writer. Sometimes the authors will paraphrase phrases in ways that don't end up making sense, and that's a good tell to think that there's something going on here. Paper mills in particular are becoming more common. And reviewers are an essential tool in catching those papers because they're the ones reading them closely, which really helps to spot the things that perhaps the editor hasn't seen initially from a quick read. You're obviously not responsible for spotting ethical issues in a manuscript, but you're often best placed to spot those cases of perhaps fraud or plagiarism, or even possible defamation or libel if there's something being said about somebody that you think isn't quite right. If you spot that, then you're the best person to raise that with the editor. So I've included some examples of what might be helpful in terms of phrasing criticism constructively, because sometimes when you are involved in doing a review or feedback for somebody, it can be difficult to know how exactly to phrase that. So unhelpful feedback includes vague statements, commands, gendered or biased phrases. Here, for example, there are some instances where the reviewer is just saying it's unreadable, you didn't proofread at all. That's not very helpful to the authors, because the author obviously thinks they've done a good job and it is readable. How do they improve on that? So a better statement is here to tell the author what needs to change without making it seem like the authors haven't done the work, because they have, and they should be appreciated for that. It's best if you write your reviews in the third person, so with they instead of you, because some people can receive that as accusatory and too personal. Obviously, be careful to avoid any gendered stereotypes. This is one example, but obviously there are many. But just make sure that you are focusing on the actual text itself and what it says, and not taking away from it your own interpretation of too emotional. You want to tell them what kind of language they should be using to avoid that effect. And one that comes up quite often is telling authors that their paper needs to be edited by a native English speaker, especially when you're submitting to journals that publish in English. So the stage at which a language is learned is not indicative of proficiency. You want to provide examples of the types of errors that you have seen in the paper, so the authors know exactly what it is that you're telling them to fix. You could suggest that they use a proofreading service if you think that would be suitable. You yourself as a reviewer don't need to copy edit the paper for the authors, but it will help them to point out where they might need to polish, which is absolutely fine. You want to offer examples or explain why something is unclear. So you want to focus on as well on the manuscript and not the authors. Usually you won't know who the authors are, but even if you have an inkling of, the gender or location of the authors, that shouldn't cloud your judgment. You should assess based on what is actually in the text itself. Some more examples here. There's non-constructive phrases, so saying the paper contributes nothing to the field. Obviously that's going to make the authors angry, and also it makes assumptions. It doesn't offer them any guidance. It doesn't help them at all. Just think about how you would feel if you got that feedback. You want to maybe tell them that, the findings have already been published in previous work, but here's some ways that you could maybe explore and develop the topic. In general, your structure of your review, so how do you write a review? It would usually have to be something like, it would usually be something like you give a brief summary of the paper, which shows the editor that you've understood the paper. You want to list maybe the major strengths and contributions, and then you can pick up on some aspects that need to be improved. And then you can go into key areas of improvement with specific suggestions. So you could always number these, or you could make it readable. It's better to kind of split that up instead of having a wall of text for the author. And then at the end, you want to put clear recommendations. So some journals will ask you to put that separately, and that's when you would list your accept, minor revision, major revision, reject options. It doesn't need to be a long review. It's better to be clear and have a useful review instead of expecting that your review should be really long. Obviously, if you have a lot to say, that's absolutely fine. Just make sure that it is actually helping the authors, and you're not just assuming that length equals a good review, because not necessarily. So we looked at sort of instances of good peer reviews. So what makes bad peer review? Again, as we've said in the previous slide, you want to avoid these kind of comments and approaches to reviewing. So dismissive comments obviously won't help the authors and are likely to be met with an offended or hostile response. So if it goes for revisions and the authors respond, they might not respond in a very kind way, and you end up getting into some sort of like anonymous argument, and nothing is actually getting improved at all. Also avoid reviewing a different paper, which sounds a bit strange, but it's just making sure that you are reading the text the authors have submitted and you're not assuming things about that text that you haven't actually read. It's easy to do, especially if you are reviewing a few different papers, but just making sure you have that paper in front of you and you're giving the authors specific feedback on their work is important. Also avoid pushing your own work, and don't suggest that the authors cite your papers unless there's one or two that are genuinely relevant. So occasionally it will be the case that you do have a publication that you think the authors would benefit from reading or citing, but don't use it as an opportunity to ask them to cite 12 of your own papers, because that is not the purpose of peer review, and most likely it will give the authors the indication of who the reviewer is as well, which can jeopardize the anonymous process. Also vague comments, so they obviously make it difficult for the authors to know how to respond, and then you might also feel frustrated when they don't respond in the way you expect if you review the revision. So again, it can create that circle of frustration and nobody's actually getting the feedback or the responses that they want. So be clear in what you want authors to do. Don't be concerned that that means that you're being rude. If you're just describing something that the authors can improve, that's absolutely fine. Similarly, one-word responses are also unhelpful. So sometimes you'll get like questions in a particular reviewer form that you say yes or no to. They're not helpful because they don't give context or substantial information. So even if you're saying, if there's a question about originality of the paper and you just say, yes, it's original, that's not really very helpful. Why is it original? Like, what could the authors take from that that's useful? In some cases, there are questions to answer and then a free text box. So again, if you want to elaborate in your comments later, that's absolutely fine. As long as there's decent detailed feedback somewhere in the review, that's okay. Avoiding these points also helps the editor because they're able to trust and use the review, and it means they don't have to seek alternative reviewers as well, which can take time. And again, it can add time onto the whole process, which again can be frustrating for authors. Sometimes it's unavoidable, but most of the time we want to avoid extending the process as far as possible. And lastly, in this little section, I'll just mention some peer reviewer do's and don'ts to keep in mind. So if you do agree to review a paper, make sure you have time to complete the review. So again, a lot of journals will tell you how long you have to do the review, and just make sure that that is okay for you. If it's not, that's absolutely fine. You don't have to review at that time. The editor will invite you again in the future if you're able to review then. It's very frustrating for authors when reviewers agree, but then they don't submit on time and they're waiting and they're waiting. And that's another instance of seeking alternative reviewers, which again takes a long time to do. Also check that the manuscript does fit within your expertise. So it might be that it's maybe on the outskirts of what you normally do and it's not quite right. That's absolutely fine. You don't have to agree. Again, you can just respond and tell the editor that that's not suitable for you. Advise the editor if you have any conflicts of interest. So again, you might not be sure if you do have a conflict of interest, like you might have met the author at a conference or something. In that instance, just ask the editor if that's okay. They'll be able to advise, and if they need to, they can consult with the publisher to check as well. It's better to declare that than to later on have it found out and then you're not sure if that's okay or not. And again, make sure your feedback is constructive and actionable. Also inform the editor if you suspect any ethics issues, like unauthorized AI use and so on. Again, it's not your job to actually like fix that yourself. And again, you might not be sure if those things are actually present, but if you let the editor know, then they have all the information they need to investigate and take it to the publisher as well. And if you can't review a paper, if you have any alternative reviewers that you can suggest, that's always really helpful. It helps to build the reviewer database, and it gives editors alternatives to invite to help the process along as well. Obviously, don't agree similarly to review if you don't have the time or expertise, and avoid using personal or biased language, as we talked about. Also, don't copy edit the manuscript. So it's not your job to edit it. You can point out obvious errors that are maybe getting in the way of the paper making sense, that are obvious. And as I said before, you can suggest that the authors use an editing service, but you don't have to waste time doing like a line by line edit. That's not necessary. And also, most formatting issues are picked up by the publisher if the paper is accepted. So unless that's causing a problem with the content, I wouldn't worry about trying to fix those either, as they're usually fixed later on. It's more important to focus on the content of the paper. If you are reviewing, please don't upload a manuscript to a large language model or AI. Most publishers, that is the case. It's mainly because that is a non-confidential use of the author's work. So they haven't consented to that being done, and it creates its own problems, which I'll touch on later in a different slide. And don't ask authors to do too much work, which can be hard to kind of assess how much is too much. But if your review is really long and you think, I'm asking the authors to do a lot of work here, it might be the paper isn't the right fit for the journal at that time, and reject might actually be the most suitable recommendation. If you're asking the authors to do work that would take them months and months and doesn't seem feasible in the time, then that's an indication that you might actually need to suggest that they submit later or elsewhere. And as mentioned before, don't suggest the authors cite your own work unless it's relevant. So coercive citation is unfortunately an issue across journals. Coercive citation is when a reviewer is pushing an author to cite their own work, and with the aim of increasing their own citations. So that's regardless of whether those references are actually relevant. For Emerald in particular, I can say that we don't require authors to cite any reviewers or particular journals for their work to be accepted. And that will likely be true of most publishers. It's not a condition of accept that authors do everything the reviewer says. If you see as a reviewer that another reviewer appears to be doing this, then you can contact the editor to let them know. So you have access to the other reviewers' comments once the decision is made. And if you see something that looks a bit concerning, then feel free to flag it to the editor so they're aware. So we've talked about the how of peer review, and now we'll return to why. So peer review benefits editors, authors, and reviewers themselves. So we'll have a little look at how that plays out. So reviewer benefits, editor benefits. Peer reviewers aren't replacing editorial judgment, they're complementing it. So when we're telling editors that they need to get 2 external reviewers, we're not suggesting that the editor doesn't know their subject matter and can't assess the manuscript. It may be that the reviewers have specific subject expertise that the editor maybe just isn't quite as familiar with. And also, as we've mentioned before, reviewers are then able to spot patterns, unusual factors or concerns that they may be familiar with, or maybe just their close reading of the work helps them to see. And that really benefits the editor as well. I asked one of our editors-in-chief why it was important to have good peer review, and he said, peer reviewers protect the integrity of what we publish, help authors strengthen their work, and enable editors to make fair and informed decisions. Good reviewers do not only evaluate a manuscript, they help enhance the meaning of cumulative knowledge and foster a culture of shared learning. So that's one of our editors-in-chief who he was very keen to let me know how important it was that the reviewers that he got were fair, and as you know, they really contribute to his journal in making the publication strong. Also author benefits, so obviously they benefit from the critical feedback, and it means they can improve their work and they're not publishing something that could have been, you know, obviously improved during peer review. It helps to have another set of fresh eyes, so even when you're just doing a paper yourself or some piece of writing, you will know that it does help to have somebody not so close to the work look at the work and let you know what might be possible to improve. It's not the goal is not to say that, you know, you can't write this. It's just that we're always too close to our own work. So having that second or even third perspective really helps. And also having the other expertise and experience can really help as well. So especially if an author is quite new to the field, it can really help to have that experience and judgment from somebody else within that area. And it gives them the scope to be able to improve and their knowledge as well as the paper itself. So from the author perspective, they want to come away knowing that the reviewer put some thought into their comments and clearly read the paper. Authors should know, and they do usually, that there's no such thing as a perfect paper. Everyone needs to have improvement and suggestions made. So good peer review is vital for this. So reviewer benefits themselves. So what's the benefits if you want to become a reviewer? Well, you can establish your expertise and enhance your academic or professional reputation. So once you're reviewing, then you get known, especially to them, the editors and the editorial board as well of a specific journal. You can read research before it has even been published, which can be really helpful. It gives you an idea into what's coming up and what common trends you might see in manuscripts. If you've done a few reviews in a few months and you maybe see certain topics arising, that can be really interesting and helpful as well. And also learning from other reviewers. So I think one of our editors-in-chief was saying that she thinks that one of the biggest biggest rewards for being a peer reviewer is you get to read the other reviewers' comments. And she said the amount of learning she's done, and she still does, even in her high status as an editor-in-chief, from reading other reviewer comments has been astronomical, because you're finally seeing, you know, oh, I was too harsh on that review, or I was maybe a bit too easy, or you read the review and think, I didn't even catch that. And it's learning from each other and improving your own work as well as the authors as well. And also returning the favour. So you're likely to be a published author, or at least exploring the possibility of being one, which means that others have found the time to review your papers, and now you can repay the courtesy. Journals publishing is largely based on this culture of returning the favour and giving to get back, basically. So it does benefit to be a reviewer, because when someone is asked to review your paper, then you're obviously going to hope that they do the same. They agree and they do the same good job that you do. And also building a relationship with a journal's editorial team can be very valuable, because it lets them know who you are, and it can increase your chances of them being invited to join perhaps an editorial review board, and then maybe from there in the future you could become an associate editor, a part of the team. It's a good way of getting yourself known to a journal, especially if there's one or two journals that you are really keen on and you think could be a great fit for you. That is a way to get involved there. There's also wider recognition possibilities as well. So for example, Emerald, each year our editors nominate outstanding reviewers for our Literati Awards, which is again another great way to get recognised for your work. So thinking about research integrity, which is obviously an area that's just going to become more and more important with advances in technology, including AI, and also the general expectation for researchers to publish more and more. So it's important to use the trusted role of the peer reviewer wisely. So this slide recalls what I mentioned earlier, but with more of a focus on points that matter from a research integrity point of view. So this is from the Committee on Publication Ethics, which is a great go-to for any ethics queries or concerns. And they are very firm on the ethics of peer review, so making sure that your reviewers are providing an unbiased, constructive critique of the manuscript, respecting confidentiality, so they shouldn't disclose any information for personal advantage, and they shouldn't be sharing it, for example, in social media. That happens sometimes. It should be confidential, and you should respect that process as well. Declaring potential conflicts of interest. So again, if you're not sure, always declare it, and then it can be checked. And also make sure that you're completing your evaluation promptly. So avoiding delay as much as possible. It obviously, delays then can prevent the dissemination of important research findings, and that can affect authors' careers. And again, avoiding bias, respecting property rights and recognising the contributions of others. So reviewers are expected to uphold the highest ethical standards when they're evaluating, which seems like a lot of pressure, but actually when you're doing it, it is quite straightforward. It's just thinking how you would like someone else to behave towards you. And again, the default being, if you're not sure, always get in touch with the editor or the publisher and ask, because we're always happy to help or clarify. I'll just mention a bit about AI and peer review, because that is obviously a hot topic at the moment, and it will not be going away anytime soon. So it's obviously a changing landscape. It will become different as we go along. Like in a couple of years, it will probably look completely different from how it does now, and we'll just have to get used to the fact that AI is part of writing and research. It's just how we use it that is important. The problem with AI at the moment is that it can hallucinate references in research. So when authors are asked not to use it for copy creation, but they can use it for copy editing. So that distinction is quite important. That is our policy at Emerald. We don't mind if they use it for polishing the language, but we don't expect AI to be used to create or generate work, because it can't be credited as an author. It can't be accountable for the integrity of the work, and it obviously can't be contacted later as a corresponding author to clarify any concerns. So it can't be an author, and therefore it shouldn't be authoring any work. Excuse me. So always check the publisher or journal policy if you're not sure what that is. So then if you come across something in a review that looks like it might be AI generated, then you can flag that to the editor. We also ask that it's not used for peer review because of confidentiality issues. So if you upload work to a large language model, that breaches confidentiality because the paper is then used by that AI, and the authors haven't consented to doing that. Again, if you want to upload your review and you could then use it to improve the language, that would be probably fine, but just make sure it hasn't got any confidential information in that could affect the authors. I'll just give a quick case study example of peer review that has gone a bit wrong. So in this instance, this is a reviewer that effectively provided this response to 2 different journals across 2 different publishers and entirely different papers, and therefore it can't be valid or relied on as a rigorous assessment of the articles, because it's the same comments. The reviewer obviously hasn't read the paper, or if they have, they haven't engaged with it. It illustrates the need also to check that the review correlates with the content of the paper, and it shows at length. Doesn't mean that it's got depth or detail, because this is quite a long review, but again, it's not giving detail that the authors can work with. The editor really also has to weigh up the reviews provided, as well as they're making their own assessment. So again, they should be guided by the reviewer, but not directed by them. And this example is bad for various reasons. So the authors will be confused because some of the comments won't apply to their particular work. If it's in a different field, for example, it says software has been used, but maybe they haven't used any. And the editor might accept it in good faith. And then when it's discovered that there has been a duplicate review, then further delays will occur because the editors will need to find additional reviewers, or the acceptance decision might need to be rescinded, and then the manuscript might need to be investigated. If it is published, then it might lead to retractions or corrections later on. Even if the authors themselves weren't directly involved in the situation, the work may be checked to make sure they haven't been involved. And again, that can harm their reputation and cause delays. And also it can be quite upsetting for the authors as well. And the reviewer might not think this is a big deal because maybe enough of the comments are, they make sense, that they maybe think it's fine, they're busy, they just want to submit the same thing. It kind of fits the paper a little bit. Or maybe something more unethical is going on. Either way, it adds time to the process and can lead to time-consuming grievances and investigations, and it doesn't benefit the authors or the editors. So peer review can't catch everything, but it has to be done in good faith. So that if questions are ever raised in the future, then there's evidence and audit trails available to back that up and investigate and check. So now let's just end with some practical steps that you can take to become active as a peer reviewer. If I haven't put you off by all the different factors I mentioned before, I'm sure not. You'll be all very keen to get started if you haven't already. So here are some resources you can look at if you want to get more knowledge and improve your learning around the subject. So there's publishers will have reviewer resources web pages. So each publisher will have a hub or some guides that they can that they use to tell reviewers how to review, what they can do with that publisher to get started. So that's always a good start if you have a publisher or journal in mind. Have a look and see what they say and recommend. At Emerald, we have 3 podcast episodes that go through 3 perspectives on peer review. So we have an author, editor in chief, and reviewer perspective, and they're quite interesting because they discuss why it benefits, how to become a reviewer, and what they look for in a good peer review from those different perspectives. So it's worth checking those out if you're interested. Also, reading published articles of relevant journals is a useful way of knowing what's expected, what kind of topics you might come up with. Even if the reviews aren't published alongside, you get an idea of the areas of interest, and then you can see, oh, actually that journal sounds really right up my street. I'd like to become a reviewer for them. Web of Science has an academy that you can look at. There are different places you can look at for courses, but Web of Science has a really good one. It's an online course for early career researchers who want to learn more about reviewing. And at the end of the little modules, you get a certificate, which can be quite helpful to kind of, look at your development in there. And it shows you've done that work in advance of reviewing a paper. Publishers' information guides, again, there's lots of blog posts and information about that as well. And as well, linked to that, keeping up to date with industry news is important, even if you don't read everything, because nobody has time for that. Looking at publisher news feeds, or even some articles in Scholarly Kitchen, for example, that gives an idea of trends and hot topics and concerns even about peer review, like why do we do it, what's happening, what do different people in the industry think about it. It might also let you know about journals you might want to apply for through those channels as well. And every year in sort of September time in the autumn, there's Peer Review Week. So you can go on the website for Peer Review Week and have a look at previous topics that have been investigated, and you can sign up for this year's as well. So that's a week where there were lots of webinars and sessions that you can join that will explore different aspects of a particular topic. So it'd be AI and peer review, technology, intersection of different aspects. That's a good way of getting involved and just immersing yourself in all the different publishers and different companies that are involved in peer review. And lastly, Committee on Publication Ethics, as I mentioned, is a really good resource. It will elaborate a lot of the topics I've mentioned today, especially around ethics and how to approach these topics. But it also has good case examples from previous, concerning reviews and things that have happened, and how the committee has suggested journals proceed, which can be quite useful to look at and see how they navigate those, and also see what not to do as well, and what to do, I suppose, as a peer reviewer. So there's a lot there, but it is quite useful to delve into and just have a little look around and see what takes your interest, and it gives you that grounding for actually becoming a peer reviewer. So for becoming a peer reviewer for Emerald, if you have a Scholar One account, which is the submission system that we use for peer review, if you make sure to complete the area of expertise section, that will accurately reflect your knowledge, and that's how editors will frequently source potential reviewers. So they search on those keywords in the system, and that will help them to approach you with a review request. So even if you've only got an author account on the system, you can still do that, because the system will match you up if suitable, and then the editor can invite you as a reviewer. So don't think there's a barrier to doing it if you haven't got a reviewer account. You can still do this. And look for an Emerald journal that has the aims and scope that's closely aligned to your area of expertise, so that increases the chances that you will get relevant review requests. And you can also contact the editor directly. So one of my editors-in-chief, I asked him how would be the best way of doing it, and he said you can email one of the editors. It could be any of the editors. It can be editor-in-chief, associate editor, and that will put you on the radar, and that will let them know that you're interested. It doesn't necessarily mean you will immediately be invited, but it gives the editor that awareness that you are keen, which is always a good trait in a peer reviewer. And also you could ask a senior colleague to mentor you as you're finding a journal and carry out your first review, so they could give you some practical help while you're doing it, and support if you need that as well. It's always good to have support when you're trying something, especially when you're in the first kind of couple of years of doing something and you're still learning. Editors are always looking for reviewers. They're very keen to stress that if you want to have an up-to-date profile in the journal, that is one way they can find you, and also demonstrate expertise through publications, conference presentations, and active academic engagement. And then submitting to the journal of your choice also helps editors recognize potential reviewers. So having a submission in the system, even if it doesn't ultimately get accepted, which obviously is the end goal, but as a side quest, you might end up being asked to be a reviewer, which can be also exciting and help you as well. So that's just some ways you can do it. Obviously, there's lots of different journals out there, but the main takeaway is get in touch with your editor that you want to review for. And there's never going to be too many peer reviewers. We want more people who are keen and ethical and good researchers to come and take part. It's really important. At Emerald, we appreciate every single one of our reviewers who comes and helps our research get published. So that's the end of my little presentation today. Thank you so much for your time. I hope there was one or two things in there that you will find useful to take away from the session today.
Thank you so much, Kat. That was such lovely insights. We have so many questions on there, and I hope I can keep you back for a little more time, because I wish we can. We can take a few. Now I've tried to shorten them so that I can use as little time as possible. So some of the questions might sound different, because I've tried to feel them a bit more concise. Now, the first question I want to post you is that someone has asked that during the review process, reviewers generally are instructed to communicate with assistant or managing editors rather than the editor-in-chief. Why is direct contact with the editor-in-chief reserved only for exceptional situations such as plagiarism?
I think generally it's because it's just the editor-in-chief tends to be busier, I suppose. So they delegate papers to the associate editor or perhaps regional editor, because they're the ones that will have the next sort of level down of experience. So they're the next closest to the paper. So if you have some question about it, it's usually easiest to ask the editor that's assigned to that manuscript. Again, they might have that kind of area expertise a little bit more than the editor-in-chief, so they tend to have the knowledge to be able to help with the question or the concern. But certainly on, I would say, a lot of journals, if you do contact the editor-in-chief and they're not sure, they will just get in touch and ask us anyway. So it depends. It can vary by editor, but I would say contact your assigned editor first, and then they can escalate or delegate as needed.
Amazing. The next question is very interesting, because even I want to understand. They've put is, what is the weakest point of the current peer review process, and what are the practical solutions that you propose for it?
The weakest point of the peer review process. I think just the number of papers that there are for people to review. So it can be very difficult to find enough reviewers, because obviously everyone's really busy and there's more and more pressure to publish and more pressure to review. So inevitably that means it's just going to be the time taken to do it, I think. Practical solutions, I suppose that would be something to sort of take on a wider level, but I think just if reviewers themselves can bear in mind that if they're not able to review, to try and suggest other people, or to make sure that they're declining, and so that's recorded on the system and you're not waiting for a response. Or if they do accept and they no longer can review, then to get in touch and just take that proactive step. And it might seem a bit like, oh, I'm letting somebody down, I'm not able to review, but it is actually a lot better if the editor is aware of that, and then they can invite somebody else. I think it's just finding enough people to review, and that's why it's important, I think, as well, to keep your areas of expertise updated in the system as well, to make sure that when we do look for reviewers, we're finding the right people, which again can improve the process and make it quicker.
Sangeeta, any input from you from the South Asian context?
I think Katrina has answered it very, very well. I think I'll step in for some of the other questions that are coming in.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
Well, the next question is actually really big. It's got 4 different parts. Now, the first question is, what are the main components that a peer reviewer must, what are the main competencies that a peer reviewer must have? Part 1.
the main competencies, I would say that's quite hard, because each journal has its own kind of expectations of what they want from a reviewer. Obviously, subject matter expertise, the ability to think critically, I suppose, like and close read something. So you're looking at the paper and you're able to analyze it in a way that actually is beneficial, and it's not just, you know, doing a chat GPT thing of repeating the same thing back. I mean, this is why we don't want AI to review, we want people to review. So we want a human element to actually assess the paper. So I would say that would be the main thing. And also just, that would be my main things, to be honest. I think if there's any sort of specific reviewer qualities for specific journals, then that will be, you know, listed somewhere on the website. But yeah, I think just being available, being ethical, and being willing to kind of give that criticism that will be helpful.
I think respecting the timelines is very, very important for editors.
For sure. Yeah, just being aware that it's everyone's got time and everyone's busy, and just making sure that you're doing that.
Yeah. The next question is, what are the biggest challenges of being a beginner reviewer?
I would say the biggest challenges would probably be, if you're a beginner, getting started, I would think. I mean, a lot of journals have a really big reviewer database, or they're really big submissions, and you might think, I'm never going to get picked from this journal. In that case, you could maybe look at targeting a smaller journal as well, and just get started somewhere that maybe has fewer reviewers, and that would really benefit them. They're always, smaller journals are always looking for a wider reviewer pool. You want to make that as diverse as possible as well. So anybody from different parts of the world, from different backgrounds, is always really welcome. We don't want to keep the same small reviewer database. That's no good for anybody. So encouraging editors to expand that is always something that we're trying to do as well. So maybe targeting a small journal that could really benefit from good quality reviewers. And yeah, maybe just knowing how to phrase criticism, which is why I want to give some examples of that, because you might not realize how it sounds, but maybe just practicing writing it out to yourself and reading it back and thinking, how would I feel when I got that feedback? That can be quite difficult to do. I think that's hard for everybody. Nobody likes to get bad feedback, but we all need helpful criticism. And I don't really like giving feedback either. Like, I'm definitely not somebody who wants to give feedback that's maybe slightly critical, but even just being aware that you are helping somebody by giving them genuine feedback that's actually helping them to improve, and not just telling them that their paper is terrible. That's not helpful.
And within this is, what is the difference between a major and a minor comment? And how to assess the novelty and scientific contribution of a manuscript?
I think there's probably people better placed to assess how you would respond to how you would assess that, really, to be honest, because in the journals I work on, I don't have the subject matter expertise. I would say you're looking at other things. I suppose if you read widely and you're published as well, and you may be looking at different papers in the same journal, you can maybe see what's recently been published. You can then assess, maybe, is this the same that I've just read, or is this something that's maybe producing something a little bit different? Again, that'll be very subject specific and dependent on what constitutes novel, because it might be that it's quite similar, but actually it's building on a previous paper or research. So that might be something to keep in mind. And again, you might just say to the authors, oh, consider, this point is a bit repetitive, or it's very similar to this other research, and maybe just think of a different angle. I've forgotten your first part of your question, Disha, sorry.
No, that's fine. So the first part was that what is the difference between a major and a minor comment?
Major and minor, yeah. So a major revision will be something that requires, so usually major revisions can be anything up, it depends on the journal, but say, for example, we'd give like 60 days for a major revision. So it's something that's going to take the authors a couple of months to complete. So they might have to go and do more analysis, or, a deeper dive into like their methods. It's something that really requires a bit more of a substantial change. So it's not going to take them a couple of weeks, which is often what you get for minor revision, which tends to be like, you just want to, it's not quite there, but it doesn't require this kind of extensive going away and doing the work that will take a lot of time. So maybe something like cite these papers, maybe improve, tweak this section to make it a little bit more readable, maybe just enhance this a little bit. it's just that differentiation of how long will it take these people to do, bearing in mind everyone's got, you know, different commitments. But I think if you're an author, you're expecting a major revision to be, it could be 60 to 90 days depending on the journal. So it's going to be substantial change. So yeah.
Right. Now, the next question I think is very interesting, because well, I would suggest that I hope it doesn't happen, because they have said that if you have recommended a major revision in the first round and the resubmitted manuscript hasn't exhaustively addressed the comments or suggestions, can you reject the revised manuscript for the second review?
I mean, yes, you could do. You can recommend rejection. You could say the authors haven't addressed any of the comments that I've made. This is in large part why our approach is to send major revisions back to the same reviewers, because we want them to assess the corrections and make sure they're happy with them. If the author has explained why, then that's maybe different. Like if they've said, well, I haven't done these changes because I don't agree with them, or X, Y, and Z, then that would be an instance where you, as a reviewer, it's up to you, but you might want to think, fair enough, they've explained, we have a difference of opinion, that happens. If you think, no, actually, this is something they have to fix, then that would be an instance of, you think, well, it's not going to get any better. You could also recommend a second major revision and give them another chance. You could say, you know, I really think you should address this because of these reasons. And give them, they can go back for more than one revision. So if you really need to tell them to do that, that's fine. It really would just be dependent on, I think, on their response as well. So I think as authors, they also have a responsibility to reply constructively as well and explain why they haven't done something. So it's not just all in the reviewer, the author has to engage with that as well. And then it's up to the editor, really. If you're explaining in your review, there's always a box for confidential comments to the editor as well. So if there's anything you don't want the author to see, but you want to tell the editor, you can put that in the box. You can say these authors haven't addressed anything I've said, so I'm recommending this. However, if you decide to bring it back for another revision, I'm happy to take a look. You know, you could do it that way. So right. There's always an avenue that you can communicate that to the editor, so you can give them an idea that there's something there that maybe they want to look at more closely and assess as well.
Sangeeta, from the point of view of, let's say, developing economies and where language can be barriers, there are a lot of things involved. What do you think, could be one of the ways of supporting an author with this sort of query?
Okay, so I think first thing is to remember that the peer review process is a time for good communication between the journals and the authors. It is also seen that good peer review actually leads to better downloads and citations. So it's a very powerful process. And when it comes to peer reviewing papers coming from countries where English is not the primary language, of course, reviewers will face a challenge. And what we tell authors is to make sure that at their end, they make it as readable as possible. Because in the end, it is the author's responsibility to make it as communicative as possible. So the reviewer, of course, in this case would be limited to what they understand from this, from the paper that they receive to review. So it has to be, the peer review process itself, it's a very, it's a loaded process, and the reviewers have that responsibility. But it requires the reviewers to be very honest in terms of how they feel about the paper, give good criticism that helps enhance the paper. If there's any issue related to the language, usually it doesn't go past the editor's desk, but if it comes through to the peer review stage, they should be able to, flesh out all the questions that they get because something is not making sense or, there's confusion arising. So that's what I think we get limited to. But it's author's responsibility to make sure that they give a paper that is, as clear from grammatical errors, typos, and things like that, which can help the reviewers also go through the process effectively.
Thank you so much, guys. I'm conscious of the time, but maybe I can take just one or two more questions, and then we can close it off. Two very interesting questions. One is that, are there any minimum or maximum limits for commenting on a manuscript?
So like a word count, or
As in going back and forth, how many revisions can you give? Like,
oh,
what's
revisions, sorry.
yeah.
Yeah, there isn't really. I mean, it depends. I mean, you don't obviously want to have a, like I've seen an R, like, so .r number is in Scholar One how we denote a revision, and I've seen like R8, which is a bit ridiculous in my I mean, for the authors, imagine getting 8 sets of revisions, you just give up
Oh
at
my
that point. But they don't, they keep coming back because it might be just a small amount of change, and it is very much an editor discretion as well. So they can
yeah.
do it as many times as they need, but hopefully we'd like to hopefully see a maximum of 3, because by that point you're thinking any changes are either going to be fixable and minor, or if they're really not by that point, then it's maybe just not the best fit. So it isn't there isn't a limit as far as I'm aware. I've never seen more than 8 or 9, so there could be more that I'm not aware of. The aim is to keep it obviously as minimal as possible, but yeah, if more changes needed and more time and more revisions, that's fine. If that's working to a good end goal, then yeah, you can have more than 2 or 3.
Amazing. Last question. They've asked that, can a postgraduate student be a junior peer reviewer?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. I mean, I think we've got some of our journals have early career review boards, and I think we're looking at, a few more getting those as well. So it's definitely a drive to encourage earlier career researchers to take part. There's always, there's people have interesting and different perspectives, and will spot different things at different stages anyway. So as far as I'm aware, there's no barrier to that stage. You might want to put in your reviewer description PhD, but you don't have to. You can just leave that blank. And again, if you have somebody that is more experienced that you know of that can help you kind of, you can say, I've got this review, I'm not quite sure how to structure it, but I think I know this topic. And then that's a good way of calling on somebody else who you know who's got that experience and working together to create a review. And we don't offer like a core review as such, but again, you could ask them to sort of look over the comments and make sure. But yeah, absolutely, you can definitely sign up for a reviewer account if you're a postgraduate student.
Amazing.
And I just want to add that Kat has already shared resources on how to get started and how to be a good reviewer. I think it's very, very important for those who are just starting and getting familiar with the process to go through those resources and start building from there.
We are going to share all of these resources. We're going to send a post email maybe in a week or so. So please watch out. All of the resources that Kat has shared, we will make sure that the links are there. You will be able to watch the video. Everybody is going to receive a certificate. One last question maybe, because I don't know if if one person can get stuck. They have said that if you receive a near perfect paper and there is nothing really you can critique, like, can we just give a really overall good review to something? Like, can I just say, oh my god, that's perfect, can we go ahead?
I mean, yeah, you could. I mean, it's not very often you see it, but yeah, if it's genuinely like for a reason, like it's, you could say, yeah, accept it. And then I would still give some comments, because it helps the editor to understand that you have read it and it's not just, this is great and I haven't bothered, just want to accept it because it saves time. It helps. That's a good example of, obviously, give the authors good feedback, but then you can say to the editor, like, this is really an unusually good paper. I personally think it is good to go. It might need these little minor things fit. That's absolutely fine. I mean, if you're doing that a lot, I would say 2 or 3 times, I'd say that's very unusual, and you might just want to make sure you are looking at the text like in a critical manner. But occasionally you will be fortunate enough to get one of those possibly, and in which case, yeah, you can do that.
Thank you, Kat. Thank you, Sangeeta. Thank you to my friends and colleagues in the back, Amy, G, for helping with this. To the wonderful audience who have been so engaged with this topic. We promise to share all the information about how you can be a reviewer for Emerald. What is the reviewer week? We'll make sure that the people who have attended today receive all the information about what's going to happen in terms of reviewing with Emerald. So please stay tuned. And we'll be in touch. Thank you so much, everyone. Thanks, Kat. Thank you, Sangeeta. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you.
Yeah, I hope you all have a wonderful day ahead, and evening if you're anywhere. Thank you, everyone, for joining.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thanks so much. Bye, everybody.